Surfaces and Sunday Best on Vibe Breakfast. Miles and Al here, joined now by Watford MP Dean Russell. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hi Miles, good to speak to you. It's been a few weeks.
It has been a few weeks. How have you been keeping, firstly?
Yeah, good. Just busy. It's an awful backdrop with COVID, and my goal has just been to try and help as many people as I can. So we've been doing literally thousands of cases, and just trying to stand up for Watford in Parliament, really, and do everything that I can to help in the local community. But feels like every week is a year at the moment, but it's going in a flash in a really weird way. Well,
talking about standing up, I saw you stand up in Parliament on Tuesday to talk about free school meals. It's been one of the big news headlines, front page news over the last few days, few weeks, with Marcus Rashford campaigning for free school meals to continue over the summer holidays. The government has been taking what's been described as a U-turn in now saying they will provide them. What's led to a government U-turn here, and do you think it's the right decision?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right decision, and I have to applaud Marcus Rashford for raising it so highly. I think that the reality is that, what people don't see is how much lobbying goes on behind the scenes. And so I'd been speaking to government even before knowing about Marcus's campaign, but I thought it was fantastic that had that weight behind it. But talking about, let's continue this. But one thing that's really important to know is that during the summer holidays, there was always a very clear plan to help kids who were vulnerable. So there was never a situation where kids were going to be left without being able to have food, because there was a lot of targeted work, and there's a £63 million, which I know was being put out to local governments so that they could help support kids. But there's a lot more going on as well in terms of opening schools up for opportunities. But I think for me, the free school meals during this particular time was something where I felt very strongly that we should continue it. I've been, as you know from previous conversations, going out and doing quite a bit of volunteering with groups, and that's included taking meals to food for families at schools. And so for me, I felt that actually it was more, as much as anything, it was a message out to parents who were struggling, especially during the COVID crisis, that we should continue that. And I was really pleased that the government did what they did. When I stood up in Parliament, I made the point, actually, that whilst, politically and in the newspapers and everywhere, there's all this negativity, and this stupid phrase of U-turns. And the reason why I say stupid phrase is that what it does is then attacks the government for listening and doing the right thing. And in this instance, in the chamber, I stood up and specifically said, when I hear the phrase U-turn, I hear thank you, you listened. And okay. I think that was one of those cases.
Well, there's another time U-turn's being used is yesterday's announcement that the government is going to ditch its own track, test and trace app that it was trying to develop, that was tested on the Isle of Wight, to go and team up with tech giants Google and Apple. Again, people are using this to accuse the government of weakness, of not getting it right in the first place. What do you say to those people?
I say I've worked in the digital industry for 20 years, and the challenge is to get any development through and live is huge. We talk a lot about agile development in the tech space, and I think that my view of this, because I was involved in the early stages because I'm on the Joint Committee for Human Rights, so we looked at the app in quite a lot of detail at that time, and it was always a case that that it was going to be reviewed. It was going to, the trial on the Isle of Wight was going to help identify the future development of it. I think I would have loved the app to have been able to launch. But I think there's also been challenges in terms of Apple and Google in terms of their rules around the use of the app and the technology, or the use of data storage within their app stores. When it comes to money spent, though, on trying to develop the app and the test, can you understand why people would be frustrated? I do. Oh gosh, of course, yes. And I've been on when I've been in agencies. I've seen the client side of things when things have been tried and tested and developed. I think my view, though, is this. I suppose in a more simple way, is that throughout this whole crisis, we've the government, and in particular Matt Hancock, actually, has been incredibly ambitious. You know, we were told repeatedly that you can't do things. The Nightingale hospitals are a good example. Getting all the ventilators up and running. You know, now, whilst we had major challenges globally around PPE in the early stages, we're now in a really good place on that. And constantly told you can't do it, you can't do it. I think it was right for the government to try and develop their own app that we then own. You know, I don't like the idea of being reliant on big global businesses, tech firms, and only a small number. I'd rather the government be able to forge its way, as did many other governments. This isn't a UK-only thing. You know, Australia, I believe, was using the same technology as we were developing for our app. So I think it's right that we try and do these things, and we forge ahead. In this instance, though, again, I think it's right that when it gets to the point where the government goes, well, actually, this isn't right, or it's not going to work, or it's not, you know, it's not going the way that we'd like it to, time is of the essence. Let's go, you know, let's change tack. And I think, actually, if there's anything through this crisis that really has come to bear on this, is that I think the old ways of politics and government of, you know, we've got to stick with the line because it's too embarrassing to say, you know, we should do it differently, hopefully has gone out of the window. And that's why the phrase U-turn I get frustrated with, just because it's seen as a real negative. Whereas in business, there's this phrase called fast fail, and in business I've heard that over many years, where a business will go, well, this isn't working right, you know, let's rather than cling on to something that might not be right, let's change tack, let's adapt the strategy and get it so that we're in the right direction. And I think with this, throughout this crisis, actually, I think the government has listened and it's tried to do the right thing. And this is another example of that. I mean, what would have been better to say, well, we're going to keep going, and then in 2 months, 3 months' time, we find that we're still in this position. So I think it's the right thing to do. But I do get people's frustrations.
Yeah.
But this isn't such a new territory for everyone, and technology is such a huge area that actually I think we've made the right decision.
Well, opinion polls are showing that people are starting to lose a little bit of trust in the government. Is this the reason, do you think, that they are changing their minds, or do you believe the government may have made some other mistakes?
I think that, you know, there's going to be learnings from this, and I think the history books are going to be filled with stories of how this has played out. But I do think, you know, when we do have that sort of review in a few months and years' time, and there'll be many, I'm sure, I think actually people will see that the information we had at the time that decisions were made, we followed the best that we could at that time, especially in the very early stages. And so, you know, I appreciate the pollings, but pollings throughout the years have not always been 100% accurate. But I do think there's a sense now that we're 3-4 months into this crisis, if not longer, overall. And I think, you know, people are a bit tired. They're a bit fed up. They've been stuck in lockdown. The coming out of the lockdown's a lot more complicated than going into it, you know, and going into it was incredibly tough. So I think, you know, it's understandable people's patients are a bit frayed and a bit frustrated, and, you know, and because it's not a case that everybody can suddenly go back to work now. It's not, I know we'll talk about businesses probably, but, you know, it's not the same for everyone at the moment as we're gradually unpicking the lockdown and trying to do it in a safe way whilst knowing COVID is still out there. So I think, you know, it's understandable people are frustrated, and the government, I think whoever was in charge would be at this point taking a hit, because government is normally the first port of call to blame for problems. But I think when people look back and look at how much we've done from furlough schemes, bounce back schemes, you know, protecting the vulnerable, you know, through the food parcels, when people look at the sheer scale of stuff that we've actually done over 3 or 4 months and reflect on it when we're not exhausted from this process, I think hopefully people will see actually we did an awful lot and did the right thing at the right time.
You're listening to Vibe Breakfast. Miles Blumsom here talking to Watford's MP Dean Russell. If you have a question, 82818 is the number. Start your text with Vibe. Now, Dean, we've mentioned quite a few times on the show you're a member of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. There's been calls for social distancing to be reduced from 2 metres to 1 metre. Where do you stand on this?
So, interesting, I actually spoke in Parliament on this in the week as well. I asked a question to the Minister on it. My view is that we've got to put safety first on everything. And but what I'm also aware of, and I've had a lot of emails and conversations on this with businesses and organisations, in that, you know, we need to save lives 100%. That's got to be first. But also we've got to save livelihoods. What I'm hearing is that the 1 metre versus 2 metre rule at the moment, when we look across the world, including the WHO, there is a goal to reduce, and in many places it is down to 1 metre. And so my view on it is this: I think rather than a blanket change from 2 metres to 1 metre, my view is, why don't we be smart about how we roll that out? So perhaps it's a case that, you know, could we do it so that in shops, if you go down to 1 metre so that they can have more people in there, then perhaps you have to make face coverings mandatory, for example.
Right.
In workplaces, perhaps a similar sort of thing. So
it's going to be hard in pubs to get your pint in if you have 1 metre.
Totally. But saying that, though, you could still, as a family, go to a pub and have a pub lunch, you know, and have your area, but then be socially distanced from others. So I think there's a real, you know, it's not easy. It's not something that can just be rolled out or changed overnight. But I know that there's a huge review going on at the moment that's taking in all of the aspects. And I think actually when we look at how those rules are changed, we just need to be pragmatic about the safety side of it, pragmatic about what we do, but making sure safety is first throughout it all. But I think when we look at other countries, you know, many of them are reducing that 1 metre rule, 2 metres to 1 metre rule. And I think the reality is we need to make sure that people have still got livelihoods to go back to as we come out of this crisis. And that, weirdly, it doesn't sound like that big a deal in terms of, you know, changing it by 1 metre, but actually that could make a massive difference to some businesses, especially in the hospitality space.
In St Albans, their MP Daisy Cooper, she has lobbied for the city to be included in an e-scooter trial for transport around St Albans. Are there any initiatives on the cards for Watford that you are pushing?
It's something that I haven't, in all honesty, I haven't been pushing from my perspective directly, because I know that the council have already done a lot in Watford around bikes and so on. I do think e-scooters could be a great idea and I support the rollout of those. I think, you know, for the way that we look at the way the world works now, especially as the government's spending so much money to try and make sure that we've got more spaces for bikes and for walking and for other transport options, that's really important. And so I'm very positive about, you know, supporting people with e-scooters to enable that. I mean, one thing that actually I worked with Daisy Cooper on directly, which I was very pleased about, was the beaching line bid, which a few weeks ago I've been working very hard on a proposal around the St Albans, the Abbey Flyer route, and we managed to get through to the next stage of a proposal to make sure there's funding now for Hertfordshire County Council and the train line to look into having what they call a passing loop, so that actually there'll be a much easier way to get to St Albans and for St Albans people to come to Watford. So I'm really pleased actually, and I think for me that's really important that, you know, I've always said that I put people before politics, and I've actively been working with my I suppose you could call it opposition, but not really. Working with others from any political party to make sure we're doing the right thing for people in Watford.
Just to finish, local businesses that haven't been able to open, I know in Tring, and it's not in our patch, but Peter Borge-Neal, who owns Oakham Inns, he's the CEO, has been saying that Oakham are going to be opening all 28 of their pubs. There are some all over Hertfordshire, all over the country actually, on July the 4th, and they've challenged the government to tell them otherwise. And if the government can't do that, they're going to open. For businesses that haven't been able to open for social distancing measures, do you have any message for them? Do you have anything to say?
You know, the main thing we're trying to do here is stop people from getting COVID. It's as simple as that. And so the reason why the government's got different rules in place for different types of businesses is because of the different types of risk. And so the truth of the matter is, you know, we want to get business back. We want to get normality back for people, but COVID is still out there. We still don't have a vaccine, despite the great news this week on progress on that. So we need to make sure that as much as we want to get things back to normal, we can't risk safety. And that's why the government's been very cautious with opening up businesses, types of businesses, on particular dates, similar with schools, similar with other areas, to make sure we're doing it in a way that's safe for the public. And the reality is pubs is probably one of the hardest ones, because pubs are the places where people are going to drink. They're probably going to, relax a little bit more. They may be a little bit less cautious after 3 or 4 pints around the social distancing. So I absolutely want to get pubs back. I really do, and I'm planning on speaking to as many pubs in my patch in Watford as soon as possible to look at how I can help them as they do start to do that. But we've got to put safety first. COVID's still there. We don't have a cure, and so anything that puts people at risk, I think, is not really worth it, because we don't want to see another spike. But I do understand the frustration that businesses have, especially those who are looking around and going, well, everyone else is open, and what about us? But I think for any pubs that are in Watford, or any businesses that are concerned about the timelines, please do email me, dean.russell.mp@parliament.uk. Please do email me, please do contact me, and I'll try and make sure I find out the details and the contact info for you to be able to see and give clarity on what's happening and when.
Dean, thank you so much for joining us. Just a little note, don't make the same mistake as Matt Hancock when he called Marcus Rashford Daniel Rashford. Whenever you're talking about our Watford players, you've got to make sure you get their names right.
Hey. You know what, I'm terrible with names, so I'm always paranoid about
Write them on your hands. Write them on your hands. Have a good weekend, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, Miles.